World leaders gather in Rome to discuss the global food crisis that is pushing 100 million people into hunger, provoking food riots and threatening world stability. But can they make a difference? This is Inside Story. Hello, I'm Imran Garda. Fighting for food. That's today's reality for millions of people around the globe as food prices continue to soar. The UN's three-day food summit is looking for ways to avert a global catastrophe. Kathy Hearn has more.
This child wakes up hungry every day, as do 850 million people around the world. It's becoming a global crisis that has its roots in soaring world oil prices, climate change and the growth in biofuels. Speculators, industrial development and growing consumer demand from developing nations like China and India have also pushed prices skywards.
In addition to that, the stocks of cereals are around 407 million tons, their lowest since 1980.
The world is simply not producing enough food to feed the people who live on it, and it's the poorest who are hardest hit. The UN estimates basic food prices have increased by 83% over the last 3 years. And this has provoked protests and riots around the world.
Nothing is more degrading than hunger, especially when it is man-made. It breeds anger, social disintegration, ill health, and economic decline.
From street fights over bread in Egypt to waiting for rice in Asia. The social unrest has governments worried.
But this time, the situation is political. It's even what I would call a matter of peace and security of the world.
More than 40 heads of state are attending this three-day summit in Rome, looking for ways to boost agricultural production.
Today's problem will only grow larger tomorrow unless we act now today.
Ban Ki-moon wants to stop price controls and trade restrictions. He also wants countries to commit to phasing out subsidies for food-based biofuels. But it's not going to be easy, as no one agrees on what or who is exactly to blame. The US says biofuels are only contributing 2 to 3% to food price increases. But the IMF puts this figure at between 15 and 30%. However, countries like Brazil are doing well from biofuel exports and don't want to give it up. But Ban Ki-moon believes the world has no other choice.
I call on you to take bold and urgent steps to address the root causes of this global food crisis. We want the firm commitment to moving ahead.
Well, these are all issues we're going to discuss with our guest today. In Rome, Alexander Saras, Director of Trade and Markets for the Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO. Also in Rome, Sylvia Boren, co-chair of Global Call to Action Against Poverty. And in Delhi, India, Vandana Shiva, an ecologist, farmer and author. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Sylvia Boren, if I could start off with you, what or who is chiefly to blame here?
Well, actually, I've been listening to world leaders today saying time and time again the things that the people's movements and the NGOs have been saying for the last 20 years. We have been saying that everyone has the right to food. We have been saying that lack of food is a man-made problem, but it is particularly women and children who suffer the consequences. We have been saying we need investment in local agriculture, in local trade. We need the economies to build up locally, and particularly we have been saying, will you please stop the unfair trade rules? Will you stop dumping subsidized agricultural products into the developing world, which undercuts the production possibility of local farmers? Now today I have heard those texts time and time and time again. So actually the positive thing is we're finally agreeing on this analysis, and I presume the Bretton Woods Institutes, the World Bank and the IMF are too. Now the big question is, the crisis has got to such a level, can we quickly get cash to women, to families, to be able to buy their food? can we actually organize the Doha round of trade to make for structural changes in the trade rules, and particularly when are we going to invest in the local farmers in developing countries? So very little money is needed to solve this problem. I have heard wonderful words today. The direction is clear to everyone. Biofuels is part of the problem, maybe or maybe not, there's some disagreement, but it's not the biggest problem. The biggest problem is the rich countries, the developed world, who are not prepared to stop subsidizing their agricultural products and dumping them and undercutting the local farmers in developing countries. And it's particularly women and children. It amazed me today that there was no solid gender analysis, no analysis that it is a man-made problem, but it's women who suffer the price, no analysis of it meaning that the Millennium Goals won't be met, that children have to go out of school and back into the fields to work, that it will increase domestic violence because of the tensions in the families. So we need to analyze this problem. It's a problem that women are paying the price for very stupid policies, and really we have been saying this for 20 years. The good thing is I heard world leaders say what we've been saying all this time.
Alexander Saras, can the problem be solved merely by throwing money at it?
Well, not exactly. I think that I heard the analysis from the First Lady, and let me give you a little bit of perspective of why prices are soaring and where we can go. The prices are soaring because of a congruence of several factors that seem to be coming together simultaneously. On the one hand, we have increased demand from countries whose income is increasing quite fast, mostly countries in emerging economies like China, India, Brazil, and others. Second, we have some of the production that is being diverted to biofuels, but that, as you know, is because of the mandates imposed by many developed countries to deal with the climate change issues. Third, we have policy responses by several countries that have caused the decline in food stocks to the point where the markets now are very thinly balanced, and hence every little disturbance leads to excessive reaction, like the recent reaction in the rice markets. So the most important structural change that has affected the food markets in the last few years is basically the relationship between the petroleum markets and the food markets. And the reason they are interrelated is because now high petroleum prices make the production of biofuels from agricultural feedstocks and food stocks quite competitive, and this diverts resources from production of food, of course, to production of ethanol.
All right, let's bring in Vandana Shiva. Sorry to interrupt you. You mentioned a multitude of possible factors here. Ms. Shiva, in Delhi, one of the factors that Mr. Saras mentioned was this theory that China and India are consuming much more, which contributes to the crisis. In your opinion, how much weight does that theory have?
Well, I would have expected the Food and Agriculture Organization to be a little more responsible. President Bush made that statement a few weeks ago. The biofuel industry put huge ads in the International Herald Tribune to say it was the Asians, Indians, Chinese eating more rather than biofuel diversion. The first point is India's consumption increased 2% over the last year in cereals. United States consumption of cereals increased 12%, and most of that was for biofuel. So if we are looking at the pressure, it's coming quite clearly from the United States for biofuels, not from countries like India. In fact, India's production has increased. It has kept up with population growth. This year's harvest has been tremendous. The real causes for the rise in food prices is the forced integration of the local economies into an international economy controlled by speculative monopolies. If 5 grain giants control the food trade, it doesn't matter how much food there is in the world, they will make their super profits. And Cargill's profits have clearly doubled over the last year, while 1 million 100 million people, increased numbers went into hunger. A second very big reason for the decline in food availability at the local level is a very false model of increasing agricultural production. It went by the name of the Green Revolution. It goes by the name of industrial agriculture. Unfortunately, the World Bank's package of $1 billion for increased investment to the South is in the form of new seeds, largely non-renewable, seeds for monocultures, and fertilizers, chemical fertilizers. This package is a disaster for poor countries. First, the farmers get into debt. They have to sell their food and can't buy it back at the price at which they sold it. Secondly, climate change is caused 25% by industrial agriculture. You add another 10% with rising fuel prices to international trade in food, unnecessary food miles. You're talking about 40% greenhouse gas emissions coming from a non-sustainable industrial farming system. We could solve the climate problem and the food problem tomorrow with investments, but not the level of investments the World Bank's talking about, by supporting ecological agriculture, supporting local economies, as Sylvia Boren talked about. And most important point is the international assessment on agricultural science and technology, sponsored by the World Bank, says this is the only way.
Okay, sorry to interrupt you. Let's bring in Alexander Saras to respond to some of that. You also mentioned a multitude of issues here. One of them that was quite interesting, you mentioned Cargill. Alexander Saras, I've got a statistic regarding a company like the agricultural giant Cargill. They announced in April that their quarterly profits went up 86%. Now, this is amid the world food crisis. Surely the general public will be saying something is amiss.
Well, you know, when prices go up and soar, obviously companies that are in the business, in the trading business, will probably make money. But I want to respond to some of the points, because I think we shouldn't leave your audience with the impression that one has to put the blame on one factor. There is several factors, as I mentioned, and these are factors, these are not to be blamed. Now, one of the points, one of the problems that has been observed recently is that these high food prices for many countries have not been transmitted internally, so they are not giving the right signals to farmers who could augment their production. And one of the things that we may say is, yes, there is a big problem with the subsidies in the developed countries. They have helped diminish the opportunities for many developing countries, but there is a big problem also with the developing country governments themselves, certainly not some of the countries in Asia, but some other countries that have not put agriculture in the top of the priorities for investments and for poverty reduction. And despite the rhetoric, this is one of the main obstacles for relaunching agriculture. And I think both FAO as well as the World Bank, with a recent report, are calling for a new strategy to put agriculture first, or at the forefront of the development priorities.
Okay, sorry to interrupt you. So let's bring in Sylvia Boren. Sylvia Boren, how much can we attribute this spike in prices and shortage of food to the wastefulness of the West?
Well, you see, the trouble is that I think it is less interesting to go into which of the diverse elements are now to blame. We can have analysis about that. What is interesting is what we need to do to change the situation. $15 billion needed straight away to make sure that women and families can actually buy food. That sounds like a lot of money, and the World Bank is not putting up that 15 million. It's much less at the moment. But when you consider that the American Reserve Bank and the European Bank have just, in the last 6 months, put out 70 times that amount to stabilize the financial structure of the world, then it's an amazing thought that this money cannot be available straight away for the people who are now suffering hunger. The Global Call for Action Against Poverty has been having actions around the world in about 30 or 35 countries these last days. Also in the richer countries, the citizens of the world from the developing and the developed countries are demanding the countries of the West to stop their unfair trade and their dumping of agriculture. They are demanding that investments are made in the local agriculture in developing countries, of course demanding also that the governments of developing countries support and help the people who have no food security and social security at this moment. And of course there have been horrific figures mentioned, even by the Secretary General of the FAO, of how on the one hand in the West we have the problem of obesity and food waste, and on the other hand we have 800 million people going to bed hungry every night. At the moment the estimates are that 25,000 especially women and children are dying daily of hunger. Now I want to put it to you that that is in 1 year all of London and Paris population together. My country, the Netherlands, will be wiped out in less than 2 years in this situation of hunger. The worst thing about this is that it is solvable. The immediate support can be given to the people who need cash to be able to get food. We have decent work agenda coming from the trade unions who say make sure people get paid proper wages. We know, as Vandana has said, how to increase and make sustainable agricultural systems. But it means that the leaders that we've heard, the 40 leaders we've heard today, have to put their actions where their mouth is. They have to be supported by the UN, by the Bretton Woods Institutes. And I think it will only happen if the citizens of the world, Avas has done a wonderful action to get people to help on this. The global
all right,
call
Sylvia
and
Barron,
others.
sorry to interrupt you. We need to take a short. We need to take a
governments.
short commercial break. Sorry to come in there and interrupt you. It is time for a short break. When we come back, we discuss the possible results of this current food summit. Do stay with us.